some things you can do to make it an atmosphere that's somewhat enjoyable to be in, to foster that hearing of the word and talking about Christ crucified, because that's ultimately what we're after.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it should definitely not be our driving concern, but it shouldn't be something that we just go, well, we're not going to care at all about it, and we're just going to let that go. Because I mean, I've seen places where and heard horror stories of things that have just been let go, and you think, oh my goodness, that like nobody noticed this, that this was a problem. So what kinds of concerns? Because you mentioned safety, but what kind of other concerns should guide us as we try to make use of, as we even build from scratch or redesign the kinds of spaces like that for ministering to youth and to kids?
Well, I do want to be somewhat specific on the safety in this, and then address some other stuff. So first off, a specific kind of concern is an ability to guard entrances where minors are needs to be essential. And actually, I've read a great book on guard, and he really strongly advocates, ideally, it's good to kind of have one central area of access for all the children's areas if possible. That's not always possible. I don't advocate spending millions of dollars that you don't have to build something that's ideal, of course. But I think that when doing new building, when redesigning, I think that can be helpful to think about. I think likewise with safety, ease of escape when necessary, and understanding that, especially, if somebody's there that shouldn't be there, if, fire happens, I think that needs to be clearly thought through. And I think that's important because we care about those created in God's image. And I think also mind the messaging that is put up. Don't just randomly put up, posters and artwork, but keep in mind that everything is theological, and everything you put up communicates something, and communicate that which is helpful, that is conductive towards your vision. And lastly, another security one I don't want to neglect, make sure that you have, fake acorn bombs ready so that, when Squirrel Terminator comes, you can take him down and protect your kids from him.
That was a helpful last point there. I like that, yeah, thinking about those concerns. And I have not finished On Guard, but it is on my list. I have read through the first portion. He's talking about screening and policy and things like that. And, yeah, we're in a situation where things are spread out, and we've having to do a lot of thinking lately on Wednesday night in particular, because we have a dinner, and then there's kids running around in a gym playing, but then we have to get them to another side of the building, and just how exactly to make that happen. And there were kids running loose, and just wasn't a good situation. And sometimes, like you said, you can't just make every, here, we're just going to have this one lockdown thing. I mean, if you don't have the money to do that, and we certainly were not going to just rebuild something that was going to cost, I don't know how much, but a lot. But I think a question to ask is, what are our motives? I mean, are we trying to keep up with the church down the street? Are we trying to just have a cool space, gonna take people's breath away, and make it look like Disney World? You were talking about. I heard of a church that several years ago had a sermon series, and this wasn't so much for their children's space, but this would have appealed to children and youth and adults alike. They made some sort of, I don't even know what it's called, but the fighter plane things that the guys in Star Wars used. They had something like that out there that you could what's that?
TIE fighters? Is that what you're talking about?
I don't know. Something from Star Wars. I mean, not really a Star Wars guy. That's a movie, and so that's not my thing. But you could take a picture with it, and it's just wow, look how cool this is. And I mean, yeah, obviously kids are gonna like it, but that really is something you would do at Disney World.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah, literally. To get your picture with Han Solo or something, and Chewie. But I think asking the motives, and then just saying, are we being good stewards of the resources that have been entrusted to us? Are we taking care of it? And, okay, could we improve this, make this a little more inviting while not going overboard? And I'm going to tend to be on the conservative end. I don't think anytime soon I'm going to be accused of going overboard with a space. Thinking about the function, okay, what is this space going to do? And I think we've sort of hinted at this, but just being real explicit, thinking about our theology, asking what saves, what gives new birth, what causes growth. Is it, Terminator squirrel? Is it, a room designed like an ark, or a cabin, or whatever else? Is it these cool accoutrements and accessories that, kids or youth might like, lasers and smoke and all this kind of stuff? Is that really what draws people to Christ, or is it something more substantive and ultimately something more powerful?
Yeah.
And so those are things that I think don't always get asked when these questions come up about what do we do with our children's spot or our youth room. I know of a church that a friend was showing me pictures of. They had not just built a youth room, they had a new youth building, and it was like multi-million-dollar, state-of-the-art facility, and it was just mind-blowing. And this is one of the largest churches in the country, but and that raises other issues too, like when you sequester them off and you create this own space for them, say about the church. And I get sometimes because of space limitations, it's just you can't have everybody in the same spot if you're going to have a youth ministry or something, for example. But I think those are all important questions to this that don't get asked enough. How is this a theological issue, or is it even a theological issue?
It relates to soteriology, I think, which is the doctrine, of how people are saved and won to the Lord. Because I think this is relevant. If we think that, the cool, fun design is what, will win people, what will attract people, having that cool, awesome building is what people need to just kind of get over the edge and make their heart open to salvation, and open up a cold heart. I think that's a theological thing. It's bad theology, but it's theology. And I think it also relates to a doctrine of human value from a safety perspective. We care deeply about safety, about how we can make sure our kids are safe, because we believe that God's created them in His image, and we must protect those who are vulnerable that are created in His image. And I think, but most of this is, I think, a wise judgment issue, that what we think is as wise and best for us. Because the Bible doesn't give us commands. It just doesn't tell us how we're going to design our building, or even what kind of building that we're to have. But I think also indifference does play a role. I really don't think it matters what color carpets are. I don't think it matters, something like, what brand of faucets you have, or I think probably, I would guess 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 of these choices are going to make very little differences.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it. I think part of it, the wider issue, just kind of falls into issues of wise judgment and how much money should we spend on this. But then, the color of the carpet or the kind of chair. So like in this cabin room we made, my boss, Mark, he's into outdoor stuff, and he knew of these camping chairs. They're different than like the ones that came out, 20 years ago. They collapse into basically a cylinder almost, and then you just kind of, I don't know what word to use, but you just kind of bring it apart, and it fits into all these little joints. And then you've got this, you cover it with this little canvas nylon kind of bucket seat, and you've got like a 2-pound little chair there that it'll zip up into a bag that you could, stick in a backpack. It's really small. And anyway, I'm like, oh, that'd be cool. So the kids have really liked that. But I mean, we could have just put like wooden chairs in there. I think that was one of those ultimately matters of indifference, but I think in broader strokes, it falls into matters of wise judgment on how we should use the Lord's resources. But yeah, I think what you said about doctrine of salvation and how we approach that, because there are churches, whether it's the cool building they have for children and youth, or the big squirrel Terminator, or I heard of a church. Again, I'm not being critical of this church. It sounds kind of cool, but they have a big slide going from the second story down to the first story, or something like that. I think that's kind of cool, kind of fun, but certainly not a necessity. We actually joked that our big children's room goes down into this big atrium lobby area, so we could, put a slide from there down and just like send the kids down. The parents don't have to walk upstairs. But yeah, I think that it is a theological issue because you said it earlier about with the art on the walls and so many other things. It reveals, communicates something, and it is theological. One last question: how much should it make a difference to us that we know brothers and sisters, even in our own country, but particularly in other places, who have a lack of resources or who are suffering in various ways? How much should that factor into when we're like, well, we're going to spend X amount of dollars on renovating this space for children or for youth that gets used, twice a week or this kind of thing. And we're going to spend, we're thinking about spending some significant amount of cash on that, or even going into debt for it. How much do you think that should weigh in?
I think we should oftentimes sacrifice those lofty things that we might want, and that might not even be wrong for us to want, so that our brothers and sisters in Christ, who are no worse than us just because they're in different situations, can have some more basic things like security. And I think this, it's not just for that. Oftentimes in other cultures, it's beyond what we even think of. So I know of a church in another country that needed the help of actually building a fence because things were being stolen from the church. Actually, food was being stolen at the church that they needed to help feed some of the members and some of the people in the area of the church. And so I think sometimes sacrifice the really nice things that we want, the Disney World type stuff that we might imagine, so that other brothers and sisters in Christ can have more in that capacity, can have some basics. But I think also don't become territorial or demanding, because we are all working towards kingdom work. And realize, I think, with any area that we have, that many do greater things for the Lord than we do with next to nothing. And so we don't need to feel entitled or like we need a specific space or a specific design.
Yeah, those are good words on that. And I think one thing that factors in is the cultural context you're in. I mean, if people in your area are used to, meeting inside an actual building and having it climate controlled. I mean, there's churches, they don't have air conditioning. They're used to that. And I guess modern conveniences. I don't know that you need to, that you're necessarily honoring God more by going, we're going to save on the power bill, and we're just going to start doing our children's thing or our youth thing out here under the oak tree. I'm going to go barefoot and not wear deodorant and just be like really natural, so that we can use that money and send it to Haiti. The Lord may be honored by that, but I don't know that he's necessarily more honored by that than if you just say, well, we're going to go ahead. People in our community are used to doing these kind of things inside a building with these certain level of modern conveniences. And so we're just going to go with that. This is the context we're doing ministry in. But at the same time, it can be taken too far. And that church that I was talking about with the multi-million-dollar youth building, they are in Texas. I've never been except to the Houston airport, but I hear everything's bigger in Texas. So maybe that's just a function of that. Seriously, I am joking a little bit, but I think there's an element of that. But I think it falls to a matter of wise judgment and what are our priorities and our motivations in these decisions that we make. Well, this was an interesting topic. It's something that I've thought about and mulled over, and I don't know that we shed any extra light on it, but I don't think it was contentious by any means, so there wasn't all this heat. But it was interesting just to go over this and hear your thoughts, and I had not really considered the safety end of this in this particular conversation, and so that was a helpful reminder to bring that to bear and just how big of an issue that is. Wonderful. So thank you.
All right. Well, good discussion with you, brother.
Yeah. Well, take care.
You too.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Theological Family Ministry Podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, please give us a review on iTunes and share the podcast with your friends on social media. All new episodes are available to listen to on Stitcher, SoundCloud, YouTube, Spreaker, and iTunes. We hope you have a great week, and join